Hi, I'm Beth Grosso. I'm the Director of Training and Professional Development here at the Center for START Services, and it's my honor to interview Melanie Hecker today for her START Talk.
Hello, my name is Melanie Hecker, and I am a research and training assistant for Center for START Services. But I've been working with START with research and training for almost 10 years now. So I've been in the START network for quite a long time. And I am a person with lived experiences. I am an autistic adult self-advocate with some co-occurring mental health challenges.
Thank you, Melanie. So great to have you here today.
I'm glad to be here.
Melanie, can you tell us about an event or an experience that influenced your way of thinking?
So there was one event I experienced when I was 18 years old that sort of turned me into a different person overnight. When I was younger, high school and earlier, I was told that I had something wrong with me, and that something wrong with me was called autism. And that in order to make it in the world, in order to get a job, in order to make friends, in order to function in society, I had to act as neurotypical, as not autistic as possible. And I had to pretend to be normal and not let anyone show that I'm autistic and try to make it like my autism doesn't exist. When I was about 18 years old, my school to work transition counselor gave me an application for something called the Youth Power Statewide Youth Leadership Forum. So Youth Power is a by youth for youth advocacy organization in New York State that advocates for youth with disabilities or experience in state systems. And they were my first employer. And so I apply for this event, not expecting to get in, but I do. And when I attend this event, I am told something that completely changed how I saw myself as a person and how I saw the disability community and society in general. I was introduced to something called the social model of disability. At this event, I was told that there is nothing wrong with me, that being autistic is simply another way of being. It's a part of diversity. It's not a bad thing at all. And since it's a part of diversity, autism is a good thing. And once more, they told me that I don't need to hide that I'm autistic and that I don't need to pretend that I'm somebody else to be accepted in society, and that if somebody doesn't accept me for my autism, that's their problem and not mine. Hearing this, like I said, changed me into a completely different person. Instead of being somebody who was insecure, depressed, and jealous all the time and wished I was somebody else, I became somebody who was confident, who was proud, and who wouldn't let anything or anybody stand in my way. Youth Power hired me about a few months after that event, and that just kickstarted my journey of being an advocate. So I just graduated with my master's degree in public administration from the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy at the University of Albany here in Albany, New York. And there's one thing that they taught us how to do in that program that I am very passionate about, and that's getting to the root cause of societal problems. There are a lot of things that people do to address societal problems. people who encounter barriers because of their disabilities or mental health challenges, or problems in education or economics or healthcare. And there's a lot of things that we both as individuals and as societies try to do to try to remedy some of those social problems. But we can never fully address those problems until we employ analysis and we get at the root of that problem and solve it at the source rather than simply slapping a Band-Aid on it. And there are a lot of different ways of getting to the source. Sometimes it can be through a survey, sometimes through focus groups or interviews, sometimes through randomized control trials or quasi-experimental designs. But what I love most of all is getting to the root of the problem. So to give you an example, I interned for my bachelor's degree internship at Disability Rights New York at their Albany office. And my internship project centered around the fact that people were being turned away from psychiatric hospitals and psychiatric centers solely on the basis of their autism diagnosis or intellectual disability diagnosis. And at that internship, I just loved interviewing people, researching hospital websites, using the Wayback Machine, looking at scientific journal articles and legal research to get to the root of why these turnaways were such a widespread systemic problem here in New York. It's just what I love doing, is getting to the root of things.
Melanie, from where do you draw your strength and what has continued to give you hope?
So I draw my strength from my community. Working for Youth Power and subsequently interning for Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley in Troy, New York, and Disability Rights New York, and the New York State Council on Children and Families, connected me to a wide and vibrant and loving disability community, especially my local community here in Albany, New York. And it's really the love that I receive from my community that keeps me going. When the local disability community here considers me one of their own and like a big family, and the way that they support me and encourage me really keeps me going. And it's the community and our history that gives me hope. Back when I was working for Youth Power, I would always ask my supervisors to tell me stories about the disability community and disability history. Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley, too, for that matter. I think of stories like the Capitol Crawl, where people with disabilities shed all of their mobility aids, their wheelchairs, their walkers, and they crawled up the steps of the DC Capitol to protest inaccessibility. Or thinking about the Gang of 19, a group of activists that fought for public transportation accessibility in Denver, Colorado, and chained themselves to buses in order to convince their government to make public transportation accessible. Hearing those stories and knowing that I have a chance to repeat them by furthering the work that was done there just gives me so much hope. And if you want to see some of what I'm talking about, check out the documentary Crip Camp on Netflix.
Melanie, if you could give one message to the world, what would it be and why?
The message to the world that I would give is, don't think of disability as a tragedy. And don't treat people with disabilities like we're a tragedy. Disability isn't tragic. A society that doesn't accept or accommodate people with disabilities, now that's what the tragedy is. But I also encourage you to see people with disabilities as whole people and not just our disabilities. The fact that there is so much more to us, to all of us. And despite the fact that we might have disabilities, whether cognitive or intellectual or physical, that we're still adults. We still deserve to be treated and regarded as adults in the community. And a final thing that I would like to mention is, instead of working with disabilities in a way of wanting to control people with disabilities or fix or our behavior or care for us, work with a person with a disability like you're a coach, trying to help them to achieve their goals and live the best possible and most vibrant life that we can.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dan Tomasulo, and I'm the academic director at the Spirituality Mind Body Institute at Columbia University Teachers College. And I am really thrilled to have a chance to chat with you about my long and winding road. And I was working at Fairleigh Dickinson University in the mailroom, and I took that job back in 1974 so that I could get my tuition paid for. I've run out of money several times in my academic career, and that was one of them. So I took the university job, and that way I could read all the professional journals. So everybody in the psychology department got their professional journals one day late because I read them all and then passed them on. I feel bad about that, but fortunately I'm over it. I would read those journals, and one of the journals, there was a job, a real job in the field, working with people with intellectual disabilities at a local ARC. And so I applied for it, got the job, and I was stunned. I was absolutely blown away by what had been done and what hadn't been done. I started really just applying the principles that I already knew in psychology to this new space. And in the mid 70s, not much was going on. And all of a sudden, I started doing well. People were asking me for my opinions, and I got a couple of articles published, which was pretty unusual for a graduate student back then. And so that allowed me to get into a doctoral program. And while I was there, I ran out of money again. There's a theme here. And I couldn't pay the tuition. I was having trouble. And right at that time, Young Adult Institute, which is now YAI in New York City, were hiring group home managers. And I was making about 8,000 in the job I was in, and this was offering like 15,000. This huge amount of money. And so I went on the interview, even though I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, nor experience. And somehow I talked my way into getting the job. And it was an experimental group home for people coming out of Willowbrook. And these folks had primary, secondary, and tertiary disabilities of intellectual, psychiatric, and usually something physical, partial blindness, auditory problems, problems with their gait. And they were considered to be the most involved people in Willowbrook. When the Willowbrook decree hit, where they were trying to move people out as quickly as possible to show good faith, that the state was sued for negligence, basically. And Rockefeller was trying at that time to show that they were doing something. So they got a bunch of people out, and then they got another group out. But this is the group that was really, they didn't think was going to make it. And at that time, there was no research to show that anything would work. And I got involved in this experimental group home, and I've actually written my memoir about that. Robert Kennedy in 1965 visited the home, and there's a video of him. he comes out and he is visibly shaken after he comes out. And he said, what's happening here at Willowbrook borders on a snake pit. And so I called my memoir American Snake Pit because the atrocities were overwhelming. They were absolutely overwhelming. And when people came to us, they were in really horrible shape. The opening line of American Snake Pit, just so that you can tell you how horrified it was, I say, I never tasted another person's blood before Sophia's. She emerged from behind the dresser naked, destroying everything in her path, her body marked with jagged keloid scars and burns, a geography of abuse by those who came before me. Like me, they had also claimed they were there to help. And I guess that just really describes that feeling of, oh my God, how could we be treating human beings this way? And really, what could I possibly do? And so that memoir tells the story of that year I spent and working with an amazing staff. We too were like ragtags. We didn't really fit any place else, and we found ourselves there. And spoiler alert, everybody in the home does really well, and it became one of the models for how to help people move out of the institution. And by the way, the idea was for us to fail. They were supposed to give us, money, give us a year, and we would fail, and then they put the people back in the institution. So there's a spoiler alert in there. And that was really the beginning. And I finished up my PhD and then came out, and I was very lucky. Now we're talking about early 80s. I was able to get consulting jobs because nobody else was doing this kind of work except for Joan Beasley. I'm going to talk about her in a minute. She was doing this work and crushing it. And obviously, we started to see one another at different conferences at NADD and a variety of different places. And so I've known Joni for a very long time. And when the field was starting to erupt, come on board, it became really clear that we needed to pool our resources. Joni helped me with some consulting gigs and getting some speaking things. And then she started to apply some of my work, and people ask me what's my contribution, or what have I done, and what's the challenge has been. The challenge has been just trying to find enough time and get the right balance between other things, clinical practice, teaching, that kind of stuff, and doing this work. But the rewards that have come have been really from I designed something called interactive behavioral therapy, arguably, but likely to be the largest, most widely used form of group therapy for people with intellectual disabilities. And Joni at the same time was doing START, and that got connected. And then I started doing positive psychology about 10 years ago. And it was like you could see everything that START was on the cusp of doing. And then this idea of infusing it with positivity and positive psychology. And because of our friendship and connection, it seemed like that was like the next thing to happen. So we changed the IBT model to positive IBT so that we're looking for character strengths. And it was just such a lovely organic evolution, not just group therapy now. Now we're talking about helping people become more of who they are. And the last thing I'll say about this is the thing I'm most proud of, or or feel that there's a contribution, is the memoir American Snake Pit, because it took 10 years to write. I'm a slow writer, but I think it captured the transition in the field, the idea where something not good was happening and something good could come from it. Anyway, have a great conference. And I hope it's really clear that who I've been inspired by in this field is Joan Beasley.
Hello, my name is Elona Wilson. I'm here today to talk about my son being a parent in NC Start. I got associated with NC Start when my son, Ethan, was in the hospital and was transitioning home. And I was contacted by someone from NC Start, coordinator, and to assist me with Ethan's transition back at home. She connected me with all the resources I needed to help my son to transition back into the house. And then I am a single parent, and she figured out right away how exhausted I was. So she connected me through NC Start with a respite program for my son to go so that I can have that break and my son can learn some independence. And it was the most amazing experience because my son and I had been together so long and no one was doing respite in the area. And my coordinator set everything up and he started going, and that became so successful for him. And I say to people that ask me, where do I get all these resources and help from? And I said, one, I had an amazing coordinator at NC Start who became a part of my team. Being a part of my team, it made it so easy to reach out to her when anything was going on with my son that I didn't have the answer to. And she was such a great support system. And so then I found myself telling other families with children with disabilities about NC Start. I've always been passionate about working with children with disabilities because of my son. I met my son when he was 4 years old. I've always spent my whole career working with children and adults with disabilities. And I met my son when he was 4, and then I became his mom when he was 7. And I realized it's totally different working in this field than having a child in your home that has a disability. So I learned a great deal from other parents. And with doing this, my son was diagnosed with one of the diagnoses he had was autism. And one of the things that I try to teach the families that I work with and have them to carry this on is when they get the diagnosis that their child has a disability, they look at that label. And I always tell them, don't look at the label. The label is nothing. It's what you do that helps your child become the person they are going to be. And I have seen that with my son. I have worked so hard and made sure that I gave him all the resources he needs to be an incredible young man. He is now 20 years old. He will be graduating from high school in June. And the hardest thing for me about this whole transition, it has helped to have all these people on board on my team, from NC Start to his school to his coordinator with the state, that helped me with this whole process. As they say, it takes a village. I've had this wonderful team of people in my life that has gotten Ethan and me to where we are right now. my greatest challenge has been, I have to say, letting my son become independent from me. And the reward of having my son in my life has been seeing his successes. I was told in the beginning things he would not be able to do. And he was able to overcome all of those obstacles. And I knew that he could, and it surprised other people. But I realized as a parent, it is up to you to find the things that's going to help your child and help your child move forward in life. And my goal was always to be able to teach Ethan so that one day, the day that is happening right now, is that he become independent and on his own. I tell him all the time that he inspires me. And the reason I say that is because he's overcome so much and he always has a smile on his face. He's always happy. He's always looking at the good at whatever is happening in his life. And I try to encourage him always to be open to new things, and he accepts that. And I think that's what's made him such a great young man and made it easier for this process for him to start transitioning with his life. Am so humble because of the things that Ethan has accomplished, and that he is such a forgiving child. No matter what he's gone through, he forgives and he moves on. And one of the things that I talk to a lot of parents about is working on the emotional piece with your child that you have that has a disability. It is so important because when I met Ethan, he was not this carefree, loving kid that I met. It took a lot of work on showing and teaching him about love and respecting others, and that no matter what, if someone says that he can't do it, he tries his best to do what they say he can't do. And he has made that happen. Like I said, I tell him all the time how proud I am of him because of the accomplishments that he's made in his life. And that's why he inspires me to do better. Listening to what parents have to say is so important for me to help them. And as I'm helping them, I'm also helping my son, because every family is going through something totally different with their child, especially during this day and time, during the coronavirus, and we've been stuck in the house. And in the beginning, Ethan was having a really hard time with it, very hard time, because he missed that socialization piece of going to school. And what I did was, in the community, we did things to make up for him not seeing his friends. And then he finally got the hang of virtual learning. And so with virtual learning, he knew that he could log on and talk to his friends every day, because he's a very social kid and he wasn't used to not seeing his friends every day at school. And that was a big challenge in the beginning when we first did the shutdown for school and we was confined to our house. And I just kept coming up with different ideas, getting different ideas from people of things to do so Ethan could still explore the community but stay safe. And I have to say that my team, NC Star, his doctors, his coordinators at the state, would give me options of things for Ethan to be able to do to stay safe, but to have fun. And that made this whole transition of virtual learning so much better. If I had to give a message to all the families out there and the friends of the families that have children with disabilities, my one thing would be give that unconditional support. Help the person and the family with the support so that they can continue to grow and progress in their development. There is so much going on in our world right now, and what we need is that village.
Hello, I'm Beth Grosso, and it's my honor to be joined today by Tawara Goode, Assistant Professor at Georgetown University Medical Center Department of Pediatrics. She is also the Director of the National Center for Cultural Competence and the Director of the Georgetown University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. Tawara has led the way for the Center for START Services journey toward improved cultural and linguistic competence for the last 5 years. She is also the recipient of the 2021 William I. Gardner Social Justice Award, which will be presented to her on Wednesday, May 5th as part of the START National Training Institute's award ceremony. Tawara, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
I'd like to begin by asking you to tell us about an event or experience that influenced your way of thinking.
I had to give some thought, and I want to share a brief story of a time earlier in my career when I first started at Georgetown University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. I'll just say you said from going forward, it's just much shorter to say. In my role, I was involved with identifying kids who may be at risk for and with developmental delay and disability, privileged children, largely in areas of Washington, D.C. with low income, specifically Head Start centers. And I would identify those kids to come over for what we call the $1 million workup for interdisciplinary diagnostic evaluation. And what I noted was that things seemed to somehow fall apart, that the kinds of strengths that I may have noticed with these young children weren't necessarily being revealed on the interdisciplinary diagnostic evaluation by psychology, by speech and language pathology in particular. And I began to note that there were differences, cultural differences in how I did developmental screening and how those interdisciplinary standardized tests were administered. And I can give a concrete example. In some of the children, I would ask, what's your name? And the kids would say, baby brother, bebop, little man. Those are just some examples. I knew that was the name that they were called in their home environment, and that's the name that they identified by. They didn't know that they were James Henry IV or some other name. Whereas when they were tested at our center, they didn't get credit for that because it didn't meet the standardized test requirements. And so I became just very much acutely aware that there are these cultural differences and that they play out in very different ways. And I think that was my beginning journey on the road to cultural competence. However, I was too young and naive to know what it was at that time.
Our next question is, Tawara, what do you want to inspire others to think, feel, and do?
Well, let's see. There's so much that could inspire others. And there are things that I'd like in particular for people to think about and to actually do. And I'm going to use the cultural competence framework at the individual level to really reinforce that. So one of the first things I'd like people to be able to do is to acknowledge cultural differences. That we all have cultural differences, and it's important to acknowledge those. People will sometimes say to me, why do you talk about differences all the time? And that we are more as human beings than we are different, which is true at some level. However, it's not our similarities that causes problems. It is our differences and our inability to understand and cope with our differences. So I'd like people to be able to think about that and to act in that way. Other is I'd like for people to understand their own culture. It's hard to talk about understanding and responding to and being supportive of cultures other than our own when we don't understand our own culture, not just our culture from our families and communities of birth, but also really thinking about the cultures of our disciplines and what we bring, say, for instance, to the START network. So it's very important to be able to understand our own culture. I think another one I'd like to emphasize is to be able to engage in self-reflection. That's so very important. Sometimes there are cultural bumps, things that happen, and it really is important for you to be able to think back and to reflect on those circumstances and to chart a path forward. The fourth one is to really make it a point to learn about cultures and to be in the midst of cultures other than your own. That can be very rewarding, and it will also help to really increase your knowledge. And the last one is to really remember that everything happens within a cultural context. And so that you need to be able to view your own behavior and the behavior of others through a cultural lens. So I think if we can remember those 5 elements of cultural competence at the individual level, that it will go a long way to promote our understanding of others as human beings.
Tawara, our last question is a little bit of a fill in the blank exercise. So I'm going to start the sentence and ask you to finish. I've been most humbled by.
Oh, there are so many things that I've been humbled by. And one of the things I've been humbled by is what I learn each and every day, simply by channeling Tina. Now, some of you may be really younger generation and you don't know who Tina Turner is. She's an old school, fabulous singer, entertainer, and dancer. And back in the day, in fact, 1984, she had a hit song entitled What's Love Got to Do with It? And so I ask myself that routinely, not what's love got to do with it. I think about Tina and I think, what's culture got to do with it? And when you stop and pause and just ask that simple question, you will be amazed what the answers may be. So again, I'm humbled because I have a chance to channel Tina Turner.
Thank you, Tawara. And thank you for sharing your START talk with the START Network today.
Hi, I'm Joan Beasley, and I'm the director of the Center for START Services at the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, and I developed the START model. And this is a very interesting question. What influenced me personally in the work that I do? What sort of drives my work? And I've thought about this a lot, and I have to say that in the center of all of my work is attention to families, and that I am a member of a family, and that we're all members of a family, and that we're part of a human community. And there were several people in my life that influenced that. I'd say the first 2 people in my life that influenced that both had disabilities. My sister, who is 3 years older than me, her name is Susan. She had anoxia at birth and was described as a slow learner and was in the idiot and moron class. That's what it was called growing up. And she was able to overcome great obstacles with regard to the way the world saw her versus the way she sees herself and the way my family saw her. And so she influenced me a lot in my work and in my feeling that no matter what disability or issues, you're first and foremost somebody's sister, someone's brother, someone's mother, someone's cousin, someone's child. And That's the most relevant part of your identity. So just to give you an example of my sister and what people thought versus what was true. In 1965, before many of you were born, my sister and I were allowed to go to the record store and buy 45s by ourselves. And I was 9 and my sister was 12. And I was the intelligent one and she was the slow learner. And I want to tell you what records we selected. I selected Downtown by Petula Clark, which was a very big hit that year. And my sister selected The Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. So which one of us was more sophisticated? Which one of us was leading an intelligent life? So that's just an example of how my sister outgrew me and still does for my entire life. So that's my sister. My mother is an advocate, was an advocate. She has passed away for my sister for her entire life, and then had to become an advocate for herself when she became unable to ambulate at a very young age. She was in her mid-50s. And there's lots of stories about the influence of my mother and my sister in many of the teachings and many of the things that were later developed at START, from my relationship with them, my experience as a family member. But I also want to talk about the people who taught me, people who influenced me, who were in the family field. The first person that comes to mind was a guy named Bill Lott, a very robust and boisterous, very large African-American social worker in Lynn, Massachusetts. And he headed Lynn Family Health and Children's Services. And he was the first person who actually supported my idea that we should all talk together and include families in what we then called clinical teams. And this was in the early 1980s, before START ever happened. I noticed that parents were being left out and people with lived experiences were being left out, and that we weren't all working together as a system. So Bill hosted these forums in Lynn once a month called clinical teams, which later became developed into what is now our clinical education teams at START. And he was just amazing. Like, I was an annoying person when he met me. I know you find that shocking, but I was quite annoying. And he just adopted me and helped me to do better and to help people collaborate better. And in the center of all of this was social justice. And I'll tell you a funny story about Bill that stayed with me forever. When Bill retired, he retired right after START was developed. So maybe around 1988, something like that. They had this big retirement party for him in Lynn, Massachusetts. And Massachusetts is not exactly a hotbed of social justice, never mind racial justice. There were definitely issues back then with segregation and oppression, certainly. And Bill, being African American, really forged the way for many people moving forward. And so he insisted that his retirement party be at a country club that was restricted. And what restricted means is that certain people are not allowed. And the two groups that are not allowed in this country club were Blacks and Jews. I remember going to this restricted country club for Bill Lott's retirement party, and everybody just walking in and just feeling like we were breaking down a wall. It was just an incredible experience. I also was worried that I was going to get kicked out being Jewish, but I didn't. So anyway, he's influenced me. And you say to yourself, what has that got to do with family? It's the family of humankind. You start with your nuclear family, it grows to your community, and then it grows to our society as a large. We're really one big family. All the work that I've ever done is influenced by this idea that our humanity and our human connection and our need to move things forward and accept each other has to be in the center of everything that we do in order to help the people that we want to help, but also in order to feel gratification and joy and hope in the work that we do. So that really influenced me. I'm 65, so I was only in my 20s so far. So I'm going to move this along a little. Still in my early 30s, the next thing that happened was I was trained as part of an externship program with the Philadelphia Child Guidance Center. And I was first rejected from the program because I had this idea that people with disabilities who were in residential settings needed family therapy, family support, that families needed to be engaged, despite the fact that they weren't always living together as a unit, and that there were families supporting people with disabilities who really needed the opportunity for structural strategic family therapy. And so when I first applied, they thought that was the weirdest thing they'd ever heard of. And so the second time I applied, I got in. And that influenced the ability that I have had to move forward in the START program, the idea that we reframe, we look at things in context, we see how we communicate, and we communicate with each other in a way that reminds us that we're a unit, and every member of that unit adds value to how we progress and move forward. So I hope that my little time that I've spent with you talking about my experience with my family and my work with families and the influences of people who work with families helps shed light on why I do what I do and who I am. And I believe that all of humanity is influenced by what human service providers do, that we are at the core of the social movement of acceptance, and that we are really the family for humanity. And I'm so happy to be part of this. I'm so happy that Dr. Singh and Dr. Tomasulo and Tawara are part of this today. I think that they are some of the most influential people in our family of humanity. So I thank you for your time.